Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
He's a great guy.
Now, Ross Kaminsky on Denver's talk station, 630 KHAL.
All right, good morning. Happy Monday. I'm Ross. Thanks for starting your day and your week with me. I'm not sure exactly where that weekend went. It was kind of an odd Halloween, I think, at our house, and this is our first time in this neighborhood, and we're just in a very residential neighborhood, lots of houses, lots of kids, lots of people walking their dogs every day. But I expected to have a fair number of kids, and I think we got maybe 3 little groups of kids over the course of the whole night. So luckily for us, I guess, some of them did take a whole bunch of candy. So we didn't end up with lots and lots of candy left over because some of the 12-year-old boys in particular seemed to load up with as many handfuls as they could fit into the bags that they were carrying. And that's fine. But then other friends of ours who live over near where we used to live in Littleton said they had the biggest Halloween ever, more kids than they've ever had on a Halloween night, and I guess just kind of neighborhood by neighborhood. Anyway, I hope you had a wonderful Halloween, and I imagine most people did it in a way where they didn't have to get maybe too close to lots of other people, too close to kids, both to protect the kids and to protect themselves from the kids. And anyway, we got through it, didn't we? I actually like Halloween. I shouldn't say we got through it. I like Halloween, and it's a nice, fun holiday. So I hope we all had a really fun time. Obviously, tomorrow is what we call Election Day. It doesn't mean quite as much as it used to in the sense that it's still the last day to vote. But, boy, voting has been going on for a long time, and there are a lot of states that are very close already to the total number of votes cast in 2016. Texas has already surpassed the total number of votes that were cast there in 2016. I don't think Colorado is there yet, but getting close. And I'll be turning in my ballot, and I have my wife's ballot. I'll be turning that in for her, too. She filled it out. She signed it. I'm just turning it in, just in case you're worried. But in a minute or 2 minutes, I'm going to spend a little time here on the show. So I filled out my ballot yesterday, except for the part about president, except for that one. And I decided that since so many listeners have made it clear that they want to know how I'm going to vote, and I've gotten lots and lots of emails from folks telling me how I should vote, I'm going to do that on the air. I'm going to do that in a minute right here on camera, and we'll see what producer Shannon says when, he's not too enthusiastic. He barely wants to be here. It's 6 o'clock on a Monday, but I'm happy to be here. I did get a lot of listener email. I'd say about 75 to 80% telling me to vote Trump, and about 20 to 25% telling me to, stick with my usual behavior and vote Libertarian. And a lot of folks actually sending interesting arguments, political arguments, philosophical arguments, why I should do whatever it is that they want me to do. And I like all that stuff. I read all that stuff. I didn't have much use for the emails from people saying they'd be disappointed if I didn't do what they wanted me to do. I did get quite a lot of those. Ross, if you don't vote for Trump, I'll be so disappointed in you. Just for the record, I don't care if you're disappointed in me or not. And I wouldn't say something like that to you. But for those who did include arguments like, okay, here's why you should do this or do that, and maybe you haven't thought of this, I do appreciate everything that is about using one's brain. So in a moment, we're gonna do this live on camera. Are we up on YouTube right now, Shannon? So if you go to youtube.com and type in Ross Kaminsky, you will find the live stream right now of me in the studio. And if you're looking right now, you'll see I'm holding up my ballot, and you can see, I don't know, Shannon, maybe you can tell me if the quality of the picture is such that you can sort of make it out, or if I need to back it up or move it in. Yeah, okay, Shannon says it's pretty good. So you should be able to tell that over here on the right side, I have filled in all of these little bullets, except I didn't do the last 2 judges. But I haven't yet done the president part, and we're going to do that on the air in a moment here. Before we do that, I want to just share with you an article that was written by Jed Babin, a frequent guest on the show, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, and actually he was my first editor. When I started writing for Human Events, he was the first person ever to pay me to write an article, and he's a great writer. And I just wanted to share a piece with you that was published this morning at the American Spectator's website at spectator.org, written by Jed. Here we go. It's well nigh impossible to believe that any sentient voter is undecided between President Trump and former Vice President Biden. Anyone who is still undecided is either too uninformed or too stupid to be enfranchised. Those of us who believe national security is far more important than domestic matters need to understand that most voters don't. To them, it's a question of what Joe Biden used to call the kitchen table issues, those at the center of family concerns. Joe Biden's campaign performance and his career in almost a half century in government make it pretty simple to summarize Biden and his beliefs and what he'd do if he is elected tomorrow. He fails on every issue, to wit, coronavirus pandemic. The Biden plan to end the pandemic is basically to take credit for what Trump has already done. Trump's Operation Warp Speed is about to produce in record time a vaccine that will immunize us against the virus. Trump's other efforts, increased testing, providing personal protective equipment and such, is all that can be done. All that Biden adds is to threaten economic showdowns if the, quote, experts advise him to do that. Shutdowns. What did I say? Oh, okay. Shutdowns. Thank you. Taxes. Biden will repeal the Trump tax cuts on individuals and businesses, but promises that no one will pay more tax unless they make more than $400,000 per year. Nonsense. According to Americans for Tax Reform, repealing the Trump cuts will increase the taxes paid by a family of four making $73,000 per year by about $2,000. Biden also wants to raise the corporate tax rate back to 28%, which will mean hundreds of thousands of lost jobs. Second Amendment, Biden wants to ban the manufacture and sale of assault weapons, AR-15 style rifles and pistols, and high-capacity magazines. Biden also wants the government to buy those weapons from private owners, and Kamala Harris wants to make that sale compulsory. Biden also wants to end the product liability immunity of American gun makers, which will end the manufacturing of pistols, rifles, and shotguns in the United States. Law and order. Biden has generically condemned the violent riots that have engulfed cities such as Portland and Seattle for months, but he's never called for the riots to be put down and order restored, nor has he condemned the Democratic governors and mayors who let the riots continue for months. He and Kamala Harris, who tweeted in favor of a Minnesota group that was posting bail for rioters, don't side with those who want the law enforced and order restored. Justice. Biden's son, Hunter, is currently under investigation by the FBI for money laundering in relation to his corrupt intended deal with the Chinese energy company CEFC. That investigation will be ended if Biden's elected. Moreover, a Biden election would mean that his attorney general will order the John Durham investigation into the FBI and CIA's illegal actions in spying against the Trump campaign and transition in 2016-2017 to also be stopped. Comey, Brennan, Clapper, McCabe, Strzok, and the rest will never be brought to justice. Judge Emmett Sullivan, presiding over the prosecution of General Michael Flynn, has been waiting for the election to see if Biden is elected. If he is, the Justice Department will withdraw its motion to dismiss the case. The persecution of Flynn will continue, and he may end up in jail because Trump will no longer be in office to pardon him. I'll just interject here. I think if Trump expects it's going that way, he may just pardon Flynn now, pardon Flynn on the way out, so that Flynn won't have to face this anymore. Next, transitioning, in quote, from oil and gas. Biden's desire to transition the U.S. economy away from carbon fuels, oil and gas, by 2050 is entirely destructive. Not only would it cost hundreds of thousands of jobs and about $5 trillion, It would, by relying on wind and solar power, make our power supply dependent on the weather. Concomitantly, it would raise the cost of electricity tenfold. In short, it would wreck our economy. And I'll also interject here, too. The only way that you can get to a national, true utility scale, 100% renewable energy source is if you have batteries that are capable of storing the power needed to power a city, either at night if you're using solar or when the wind isn't blowing if you're using wind. And those batteries, by the way, could be huge, regular, huge quote-unquote batteries. They could be batteries that are actually part of electric cars. There's some talk about using the batteries within Teslas and things like that and having them hooked up to the grid. But there's a lot to do there. And, whether that can be done in 30 years, yeah, maybe a lot could be done in 30 years. But Biden's talking more about 2035 now. I don't think that's possible. And in the meantime, as I mentioned in my Ross report the other day, nobody should be taken seriously in terms of their claims of caring about the climate if they don't support nuclear power, because nuclear power is the right answer. All right, and then back to Jed's article. Senility. Biden will be 78 this month. For more than a year, he's been exhibiting a loss of mental acuity necessary to performing the job of president. At least twice in the last week, he's been unable to form comprehensible sentences. Just a few days ago in a stump speech apparently about Iran, Biden said, "I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true pressure." He apparently meant true international pressure, but couldn't manage to get the words out. A vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris ousting him in 2021 under the 25th Amendment. Harris is the most radically liberal member of the Senate. There are another other matters that aren't kitchen table issues this year, but should be, such as immigration. Biden's a fan of open borders. He promises to not build another foot of border wall between the U.S. and Mexico. He'll put a 100-day moratorium on deportations and will end the practice of requiring asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while their cases are considered. Catch and release will again be the government's policy. By the way, have you noticed how this is kind of like the Sherlock Holmes thing of the dog that didn't bark? Have you noticed how little news there has been in the past year at least about the border? The only reason that's going that way is because what the Trump administration is doing down there is working, and requiring all these people who are rushing up from Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala to stay in Mexico while their cases are adjudicated is working really well, because many of them know that they simply don't qualify for asylum, and they know that since they won't be able to take advantage of catch and release and get into the United States and then not show up for hearings later, they just have to wait in Mexico and then be turned back eventually. They're just not coming, and that's a good thing. And I'm sorry if their lives aren't great, but, I do believe in the rule of law. I want asylum for people who really need asylum and are at risk of being killed and persecuted and all that in their home countries. But I'm not interested in using asylum as a way to just get into the United States and then, mostly be here illegally while you're pretending to be here seeking asylum. Coronavirus relief. More than $4 trillion in aid for the unemployed and for state and local governments has already been acted by Congress. Negotiations for another $1.5 to $3 trillion between Speaker Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin is stuck on 2 points. First, Pelosi's insistence on, quote, aid to states such as California and New York to bail out their failing pension systems. Don't forget Illinois. Second, her refusal of legal immunity to businesses that reopen despite the virus threat. This does seem like an obvious thing to do. To say that if we're going to block the ability for people to sue businesses that reopen by, for claims that they caught coronavirus at a business. And I'm sure they could still leave in the law some room for if some company was intentionally negligent. Like, for example, had an employee that they knew had coronavirus and made him come to work anyway in some customer-facing job, and then people caught coronavirus, all right, you probably should still be able to sue over that. But over some accidental thing where the company is doing the very best that it can, and maybe you've got an asymptomatic employee, or maybe your employees are all good, and an asymptomatic customer comes in, and then another customer comes in and catches it from the asymptomatic customer, and then they want to sue the business, put the business out of business. How can that not be just an incredibly obvious kind of protection to put in to protect our economy? And yet Nancy Pelosi is against it because the small part of her party that is not owned by teachers' unions is owned by trial lawyers. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. Anyway, Biden will give Pelosi everything she wants, regardless of the fact that her ideas won't help relieve the pandemic. Global warming. Biden is a fervent believer in the anthropogenic climate change nonsense. He said that one of the first things he'd redo is rejoin the Paris Climate Accords, which would require the U.S. to reduce carbon emissions by 25% from 2005 levels by 2025. That would strangle our economy and have no effect on global emissions because China, Russia, and India won't limit their carbon emissions. This is Joe Biden. It's what he's done. It's what he will do if he's elected tomorrow. About 92 million people have already voted. If you know someone who hasn't or hasn't made up their mind, please ask them to read this brief summary. And that is up at spectator.org if you want to share that with anybody you know. Now, I want to give myself more than 60 seconds to do what we're going to do next. So what we are going to do next when we come back is that I am going to fill in my ballot on camera, on YouTube, the presidential part of the ballot. I've already filled in all the rest. If you're watching me on YouTube right now, you can see United States Senator Cory Gardner, and let me tell you, I don't know if I've ever done this before because typically I vote libertarian where there, occasionally where there are libertarians on the ballot. And typically I vote libertarian for president as well. In the part of the ballot that I filled in so far, which doesn't include president, I voted a straight Republican ticket. It's been a very long time, maybe never, since I've done that. When we come back, we're going to do this together. I'm going to fill out the presidential part of my ballot and tell you how I reached the decision that I reached. We'll do it right after this.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Tom Martino at 10, 630 KHOW, Denver. Now, Impact Traffic.
This report is sponsored by Napa Auto Parts.
From the Betfred Sports Traffic Center, a couple of crashes this morning. There's a ramp accident from eastbound 36 to northbound I-25. That ramp is completely blocked. You cannot access northbound I-25 from the turnpike eastbound 36. Hopefully that ramp will be opening quickly. Do have another crash northbound I-25 just past Colorado Boulevard. That's creating a minor delay. Now, southbound I-25 looks great. 10 minutes downtown at the Tech Center. There's a crash eastbound Hamden at University. Denver's forecast is going to be sunny, dry, warm this week. Temps in the low 70s, little breezy. High of 75 today, currently 43. Impacting your drive to work, Susan Thielen, 630 KHAL.
With thousands of locally owned Napa stores across the nation, chances are that wherever you call home, they do too. So whether you stop by a local Napa Auto Parts store, Napa Auto Care Center, or visit Napa online, you can count on Napa know-how.
We all might want to celebrate after this election is over. It'll be better if we're happy with the result, but I think a lot of people will be happy just to have it over. And if you want to go celebrate, you might celebrate with a little romance with that special person in your life. But if you, as a guy dealing with ED, can't have that kind of celebration, Well, Rocky Mountain Men's Clinic is here to help you. I mentioned this, but they've got locations up and down the Front Range that are very convenient for the majority of Colorado's population. You know, so we got Thornton, we got Denver, we've got Castle Rock, we've got Colorado Springs. So, you know, the northern one up by Thornton, Westminster, they could take care of you even if you live in southern Wyoming. The southern one, Colorado Springs, they could take care of you even if you live in, you know, in Pueblo or northern New Mexico. And if you live east or west, it's not that far to get to Rocky Mountain Men's Clinic and let them help you, well, get back to having a romantic part of your life, which we all deserve to have, right? I want you to learn more at RockyMountainMen'sClinic.com. All right, so this is a new thing. Shannon, does it look like it's working? If you look at well, Shannon is the expert, so if he thinks it's working, then it's working. So right now we're in an ad break on the radio, but we figured I'd try to chat a little bit with the folks who are watching on YouTube. So now it's just us, where the radio people aren't hearing this conversation. I will tell you that this whole thing about voting this year has been quite a challenge for me. You know, I normally vote Libertarian for president. I've only voted Republican for president once since my last. Let me reword this. I voted for Mitt Romney. I held my nose and voted for Mitt Romney when Barack Obama sought re-election in 2012. Not a Romney fan, wanted to stop Obama. Didn't matter, Colorado's so blue. Prior to that, my last vote for a Republican for president was 1988. Really, 1988. I vote Libertarian. And I'm going to talk a little bit more on the air about why, but I'll tell you, it's just been so many years of Republicans letting me down and not being different enough from Democrats. And maybe it's just the issues that I focus on, right? If you're most concerned about abortion, then there's a massive difference between Republicans and Democrats. But if you're most concerned about federal spending and the budget deficit and the size of government and the number of new regulations and all this kind of stuff, Republicans have been maybe a little bit better than Democrats on regulation, but if you look at spending, they've been no better. And so it's hard to be enthusiastic about Republicans, and it has for a long time. It's kind of frustrating. I wish they would be better, but it's not up to me. I had hoped for a long time that if Republicans lost some elections because they didn't get Libertarian votes that might otherwise have gone to the Republicans, that the Republicans would become more Libertarian. And every once in a while, for about 5 minutes, it seems that way, but mostly not. And mostly losing elections that way hasn't changed Republicans at all, and I guess it won't. So I got to, rethink my strategy or, just decide what's most important to me. The other thing, and I'll probably mention this again when we're back on the air when everybody can hear us, is it's kind of fun getting emails from listeners about all this. One of the things I love about this job is how smart my listeners are. I had one listener email me and say, Ross, stop acting like Hamlet or J. Alfred Prufrock. You all probably know the name J. No, Shannon's looking at me like he doesn't know that name. It's from a poem by T.S. Eliot, a sort of indecisive guy. Before I continue, I do got to tell you about Urban Lights. I actually saw a television ad featuring David, the owner of Urban Lights, on TV yesterday. Did you see that, Shannon? Saw David's smiling face on TV, and he talked about their anniversary sale going on right now, up to 40% off of MSRP on almost everything. I think it doesn't apply to ceiling fans, but applies to most other things. And he also talked about this visualizer, which I haven't used yet. I got to go to the website and check this out, but kind of reminds me of a couple of the other places I've told you about with this very cool whole new internet fad thing that seems like it might be real, the internet's. And there are these tools, these digital tools on these things called websites that some companies have where you can click and make it look like a particular thing is in your house, right? You take a picture of one of your rooms and then you upload it, and then you can, put, for example, with Urban Lights, put a light in your room and see what that looks like. And that's a great way to really, well, it's called a visualizer for a reason, to visualize it. So I want you to check that out, or just go on over to Urban Lights' incredible 20,000 square foot, just beautiful showroom, and you can easily visualize stuff that way because you'll be looking at it yourself. Or learn more at the website, urbanlightsdenver.com, and check out with my keyword Ross to save 10% on whatever you buy, urbanlightsdenver.com. So it looks like I got another minute or so here. I had a listener say, Ross, stop acting like Hamlet or J. Alfred Prufrock. And I love that. That actually made me laugh out loud. And I got to say, it's one of my favorite things about this show is the interactions with listeners. Sometimes it can be a little frustrating. People email you and just want to bash me over the head for something that I said that they didn't like. Sometimes it's kind of funny, actually, when I get back-to-back email criticisms from different people about one thing that I said, where, just as an example, one person will say, Ross, why do you go so easy on Trump all the time? Why are you just such a shill for Trump? And then the very next email will say, why are you so unfairly critical of President Trump? Why don't you give the guy a break? And it's about like the exact same sentence, but it's actually kind of fun. It makes you think, and it's the world of a talk show host. Anyway, all right, let's get back on the air here, shall we?
The Ross Report on Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
I mentioned last week that when I see news reports of a group of armed black men and women, such as the organization that calls themselves the Not Effing Around Coalition, while I do understand misgivings some might have, I'm looking at the potential upside, and it's a big one. Namely, if significant numbers of African Americans, who are obviously part of the Democratic Party's base, become trained legal gun owners and supporters of the Second Amendment, it will make it a lot harder for Democrats to run on and pass legislation restricting gun rights. With that in mind, I was happy to see a story in the Denver Post of Colorado's first black-owned gun club called the 1770 Armory and Gun Club, now open in Denver's Five Points neighborhood. I wonder what Comrade Candy Citabacca, who represents 5 Points on the city council, thinks about a black-owned club with a black Army veteran master instructor teaching black citizens about the rights and responsibilities of gun ownership and how to protect themselves and their families in situations where seconds count, but the police are minutes away. While blacks still account for a fairly small share of legal gun ownership, on a percentage basis, no group's increase in gun purchases in the first half of 2020 was greater than that among blacks, up 58% over the first half of 2019. I don't care what a person's skin color is. If you're new to gun ownership, you're training to be a responsible gun owner, and you're a new supporter of the Second Amendment, welcome to the family. And that's today's Ross Report, brought to you by L&L Heating and Air Conditioning. You know, we've got a pretty mild week coming up this week, and then it starts feeling like winter. So take advantage of this little break in the weather. Get in touch with L&L Heating and Air Conditioning and take advantage of their $39.95 furnace checkup and tune-up that I've arranged just for my listeners. Make sure your tune-up is running efficiently, make sure it's running safely, and do it at a great price. I want you to learn more at bestdenverhvac.com.
Weekdays 2 to 4. The Situation with Michael Brown.
Biden on his new Obamacare, which he called Biden Care, says you can keep your private insurance if you like it. Gee, that sounds vaguely familiar, doesn't it? Let's talk about it on Monday at 2.
I noticed that too, actually. That same thing that Michael Brown noticed. I noticed that Joe Biden said, if you like your insurance, you can keep it. Like, is anyone dumb enough to believe that? Oh, yeah, those people are who are clapping. There are like 6 of them. They're dumb enough to believe it. Now, I have in my hands here my ballot. Here's my envelope, Arapahoe County official ballot. I've signed it already so that I make sure that I don't get disqualified based on that. Oh, one quick thing. I found much, much, much to my distress that our new home, even though we're in Arapahoe County and not in Denver, is inside the lines of the 1st Congressional District and just outside the lines of the 6th Congressional District. I am so sad. I am so sad. Diana DeGette is my congresswoman. And it's not that I hate Diana DeGette. She's just like every other liberal Democrat, and I save hate for people who really deserve it. And Diana DeGette, I wouldn't vote for her, but I don't hate her. But that congressional district is something like D plus 20. Like, there is no chance that my vote could ever come anywhere near making a difference in the congressional district I live in now. Okay, I'll tell you how I want to do this. If you go to the American Spectator website, I actually shared with you Jed Babin's piece. But just under Jed Babin's piece at the Spectator website is my piece that I wrote over the weekend. And I want to share that with you right now. And hopefully I can get through this in the time that we have here in this segment. Shannon, I want you to listen to this. So this is I'm quoting myself here, and on YouTube you can see I printed it. We're up at youtube.com, and you'll be able to watch me fill out my presidential ballot in a moment. But I want to share this with you. I spent hours writing this yesterday, thinking about it, writing about it. Here we go. I thought it was the last straw. As someone who typically votes Libertarian but was considering voting for President Trump, when Trump retweeted an insane conspiracy theory that Osama bin Laden is alive and that the Obama administration had SEAL Team 6 killed to cover it up, this son of 2 U.S. Navy officers said to myself and my friends, "This guy is unacceptable." Yet as I've drifted inexorably toward having to make a choice, for me, the choice is always between Libertarian or Republican, and particularly as I digest the implications of a Biden-Harris, or is it Harris-Biden, ticket, I'm compelled to rethink unacceptable. Those who compare this election to 2016 typically take the comparison too far. Other than the Republican candidate being Donald Trump and the Democratic candidate being an old white swamp creature, little about the elections is the same. In 2016, we didn't know whether President Trump would act on his campaign promises, whether he would govern according to the principles, to the extent that he has any, expressed throughout that campaign. In 2020, we know that he's wisely followed the Federalist Society's guidance in nominating 3 Supreme Court justices. We know that by persevering through occasionally bipartisan and international opposition, he's ushered through tax reform, slowed the growth of the regulatory state, signed the First Step Act, moved our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, brokered 3 Middle East treaties or agreements, let's not quibble about Sudan being in the Middle East, taken on China's persistent intellectual property theft, pushed our allies to contribute more toward their own defense, extricated us from the punishing Paris Climate Accord and the Iran nuclear deal, presided over record economic improvement for blacks, Hispanics, veterans, and women, allowed cabinet secretaries to make significant improvements in federal policy, 3 cheers for Betsy DeVos's Title IX rule changes, and more. On the other hand, he lies as easily as he breathes. Look at that, I'm not even breathing as I'm saying that. He shows no interest in controlling federal spending or the national debt and didn't pre-COVID. His trade and immigration policies are wrong-headed and economically harmful. He politicizes government functions, which should be immune from politics. He doesn't have the discipline to stop posting self-destructive and often false tweets. And perhaps most importantly for voters at this moment, his coronavirus response has been woefully inadequate. It's not just my opinion. At a particularly good closing argument speech in Pennsylvania on Saturday, the president said, and I'm actually going to just have you hear the president.
I watched Joe Biden speak yesterday. All he does is talk about COVID. He's got nothing else to say. COVID. We agree. We agree. It's serious. And we've done an incredible job. And at some point, they're going to recognize that. At some point, I said we've done an A-plus job. But I give ourselves a D or maybe an F in terms of public relations. But now I'll start talking about it a little bit.
Okay, so President Trump said, I give ourselves a D or maybe an F in terms of public relations. Indeed, if Joe Biden becomes our next president, that failing grade will be the reason. All politicians, especially all presidents, are double-edged swords, but never have both edges been as sharp as Donald Trump's are. On a policy basis, one blade has achieved some remarkable things domestically and internationally, slashing through an antagonistic media and a multi-year Russia investigation based on lies, and instigated by a corrupt alliance between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the highest levels of the Obama Justice Department. On a political basis, the other edge of the sword decapitated much of the GOP, handing the House of Representatives back to Nancy Pelosi and gifting to Democrats control of state legislatures and hundreds of other elected positions that impact Americans' lives every day. In the aftermath of the largest total national vote margin in a midterm election in American history, Republicans were swept away in Orange County, California, and elsewhere in 2018's suburban revulsion against this president. I wasn't surprised. In my home state of Colorado, reaction to Trump gave Democrats full control of our state government for the first time since 1936 and saw the election of an actual communist to the Denver City Council. In presidential elections, I usually vote Libertarian. I understand and have never been swayed by the argument that I shouldn't waste a vote on someone who can't win. In an ordinary election year, if someone doesn't deserve my vote, he doesn't get it, even if he's modestly better than the other guy. And in an ordinary year, the practical difference, rhetoric notwithstanding, between so many Democrats and their Republican opponents isn't much more than modest. But again, this isn't an ordinary year because these aren't ordinary Democrats. Despite the effort by Joe Biden and his dogged but unenthusiastic media cheerleaders to make this election solely a referendum on Donald Trump, it isn't. Today's Democratic Party is, if you can imagine such a thing, to the left of Barack Obama. It's far to the left of Bill Clinton and unrecognizable as the party of John F. Kennedy. This is not a deep insight, but rather one which bears repeating in order to remind us that an election is a choice. Not a choice between a flawed candidate and a perfect one, not between a generic Republican and a generic Democrat, and a generic Libertarian for that matter, but between the actual candidates on the ballot, between their actual agendas and policies and whom they would have running key cabinet departments that shape federal policy every day. And this is not your father's Democratic Party. It's the party of mainstreaming racism, of massive income redistribution, and you didn't build that, of overtly opposing the discovery and extraction of fossil fuels, the conversion of which into heat and light and power is arguably the single greatest achievement of human ingenuity, in a cultish genuflection at the altar of Gaia. It's the party of confiscatory tax rates, unbounded regulation, judicial activism, economic ignorance, and at almost every turn a conviction that their moral superiority should allow them to rule your life and mine. It's the party of anti-Semites like Ilhan send campaign contributions directly to my lover, Omar, of tyrants like Elizabeth, I'd like to be Treasury Secretary Warren, of true socialists like Bernie back in the USSR, Sanders and AOC's squad, whom Nancy Pelosi has worked hard to keep out of the news recently, of mental midgets like Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Mazie Hirono, and of liars and scoundrels like Adam Schiff, and every other swamp creature who said he or she had seen proof that candidate Trump had colluded with Russia. But right now, most importantly, it is the party of a man who has been incompetent and persistently wrong for nearly half a century in government, with examples including his 1994 crime bill. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in the interest of time here, but also his opposition to the raid to get Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. And he has sold whatever political soul he still had for the support of the most radical elements of his party who are now defining his agenda, which brings us to the other name on the ticket. Senator Kamala Harris is an unrelenting political ladder climber with a history of prosecutorial abuse and hypocrisy and a voting record that, at least by one nonpartisan group's measure, puts her to the left of Bernie Sanders. She's an original Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal and an opponent of every constitutional right you cherish. As California's Attorney General, Harris blocked DNA testing for a man who was on death row despite likely having been framed by law enforcement officers. So much for pursuing justice. These two people are the specific opposition to President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. In 2020, the difference between what a Trump administration would mean for this nation's future, for my children's future, and how a Biden administration would crush that future under taxes, regulations, assaults on energy production, rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, and appointing anti-constitutional judges is not just a superficial divergence, not just the too common boiling the frog faux difference by which Republicans go where Democrats are going, only a little more slowly. President Joe Biden, that's in quotes, is a frightening enough thought. And with Biden seemingly having aged 20 years in the past for a Harris presidency before 2025 is something I can't rule out. And so I find myself redefining unacceptable. Near the end here. Shannon, are you paying attention? Although I did not vote for Donald Trump in 2016, I'm not, despite accusations from listeners and readers, I'm not a never Trumper. Again, I almost always vote libertarian for president, and I am not moved by wasted vote arguments. But 2020 is different. While this president does far too many things that make it impossible for me to support him with enthusiasm, and that leave me far from sure that I won't have some serious regret as to my decision, what I can do with enthusiasm is vote against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the radicalism and economic stagnation and destruction of freedoms that they would impose on our nation. President Trump has done some great and difficult things for which he deserves credit and praise. Those things come at a very high cost. I'm not naive enough to believe that he'll become a man of more discipline or character during his 75th year of life, nor that he will stop sowing pointless political chaos, nor that he will abandon his harmful views on trade and immigration, nor that he will stop retweeting insane conspiracy theories, nor that he will encourage Americans to behave more safely during this time of the virus. I used to think of those things as unacceptable, and against some, perhaps most other opponents, they would be. But with apologies to Joe Jorgensen, who's the Libertarian candidate, as I cast my vote for only my second Republican candidate since 1992, it's because nothing in 2020 is as unacceptable as Biden-Harris. The last sentence of my article. Heaven help me, I'm voting for Donald Trump. And so right here, I've got my ballot. You can see no fill-in right now in the presidential part. Going right here, Republican, Donald J. Trump, Michael R. Pence, and there you go. You might have thought you'd never see the day, but there it is. We'll be right back.
Your station for Election Day 2020. The races, the results, and the reaction. Live coverage Tuesday throughout the day and from ABC News Radio beginning at 6 p.m.
I am voting for Trump.